Hi everyone, I'm Clara. I'm in my late 40s, navigating this messy, beautiful, and sometimes incredibly painful thing we call life. I'm settled now, finding my peace and my footing in a way I never thought possible just a few years ago. But the path here? It was carved through a landscape of heartbreak, betrayal, and a kind of quiet erasure that is almost harder to talk about than a single, explosive event. It's about looking at the people you built your world with, the ones who were supposed to see you, truly see you, and realizing that somewhere along the line, they decided you weren't just invisible, you needed to be deleted. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Maybe tell me if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, standing right there but somehow not registering on anyone's radar. Because for years, that was me. I poured everything I had, my time, my energy, my love, my identity, into building a life, a family, a home. I was the foundation, the scaffolding, the quiet force making everything run smoothly. But I wasn't just taken for granted. That feels too mild a phrase now. I was systematically diminished, my contributions written out of the script until, eventually, I was written out entirely. You see, it started subtly, as these things often do. A casual comment here, a responsibility shifted there without acknowledging my effort. Then it escalated, became bolder, until one day I found myself staring at photo albums that chronicled a life I had lived, a family I had raised, holidays we had shared, and I wasn't in them. Or worse, I was a blurry edge, a cropped out figure, a shadow where I should have been the light. It felt like a bad dream, like I had slipped into a parallel dimension where my existence in the family story had been deemed inconvenient, perhaps even non-existent. The woman who had planned every birthday party, nursed every fever, managed every bill, cheered at every school play, and held everyone together during every crisis, had simply vanished from the visual record. It wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. And the person responsible wasn't a stranger, it was my husband, the man who had sworn to cherish me. This isn't just a story about old photographs. It's a story about value, about being seen, about the quiet strength it takes to rebuild yourself when the people closest to you try to dismantle your very existence. It's about the unseen labor, the emotional toll, and the incredible power that comes from reclaiming your narrative and showing up with your own legacy, one that no one else can crop, edit, or erase. Get comfortable, because this is a story that goes deep, one that I held inside for too long. It's time to tell it. My hands trembled slightly as I ran a finger over the spine of the old photo album. It was bound in faded blue cloth, brittle with age, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and stored memories. I hadn't looked through these in years, not since the kids were small and we'd huddle on the sofa, pointing out awkward haircuts and missing teeth. Now, standing alone in the attic, the single bare bulb casting long, dancing shadows, I felt a pull towards them, a sudden, inexplicable need to revisit a time that felt simpler, less fraught. 250 album free, the cardboard sleeve scraping against the wooden shelf. The weight in my hands felt familiar, a comfort that dissipated the moment I opened the cover. The first few pages were a blur of babies, ours, of course, Mark and Emily. There were pictures of Michael, my husband, holding them, grinning. There were pictures of the kids with their grandparents, their aunts and uncles. There were even pictures of the dog. But where was I? Flipped the page, then another. A family picnic. Michael was front and center holding Mark, Emily perched on a blanket beside him. My mother-in-law offered a plate of sandwiches. My father-in-law was laughing. And I was missing. The edge of the photo showed a picnic basket I distinctly remembered packing, maybe even a corner of the blanket I had spread, but the person who had been sitting right there, managing the food, keeping the ants away, ensuring everyone was happy, she was gone. A knot tightened in my stomach. This couldn't be right. Maybe it was just a bad photo, a fluke. I moved to the next page. Christmas morning. The tree glittered. Presents were strewn everywhere. Michael was helping Emily unwrap something. Mark looked excited. Family friends were visible in the background, still no me. I remembered that Christmas morning so vividly. The early start, the careful arrangement of presents, the breakfast I had made while everyone else relaxed. Panic began to prickle at the back of my neck. I grabbed another album, a newer one, bound in faux leather. This covered the kids' school years, school plays, sports days, birthday parties. There were candid shots of Michael, posed shots of the children, group shots with classmates, but the photos I was in were few and far between, and the ones where I was present felt edited, cropped tightly, as if to minimize my presence. My face sometimes half hidden, or only part of my body in the frame. It wasn't just bad luck or poor photography. It was deliberate. It felt like a careful excision, a systematic removal. The wife, the mother, the woman who had lived these moments, was being erased from the visual history of her own family. My breath hitched. I sat down heavily on an old trunk, the musty smell of the attic filling my lungs. This wasn't an accident, it was a choice. And it could only have been made by one person, Michael. He was the one who had taken most of these photos, compiled the albums. Why would he do this? Why would he erase me? The feeling was a unique kind of cold horror. It wasn't just being left out, it was being actively removed. It was a statement, a declaration that my presence, my role, my very existence in these shared memories was unwanted, invalid, or perhaps never truly happened in his eyes. I didn't confront him immediately. The shock was too profound. I carried the weight of it for days, a heavy, silent burden in my chest. I watched him, searching his face for clues, for signs of the person who could do such a thing. He was the same Michael, seemingly loving, maybe a little distant sometimes, preoccupied with work. He talked about the kids, the house, his plans. He didn't mention photo albums. He didn't mention erasing me. The more I thought about it, the more other things clicked into place. The way he'd sometimes brush off my suggestions about family matters. The way he'd take credit for things I'd organized or managed, casually presenting them as his own initiatives to friends or family. The way my emotional labor, the constant juggling of schedules, the remembering of birthdays, the planning of holidays, the mediating of sibling squabbles, the listening, the holding space, was never acknowledged. Not with words, not with appreciation. It was just expected. Part of the invisible contract of being his wife. The photo albums were just the physical manifestation of something that had been happening on an emotional level for a long, long time. I hadn't just been taken for granted, I had been made invisible. My contributions, my sacrifices, my very self, had been slowly, steadily, rendered null and void in the narrative of our life together. When I finally confronted him, the words came out in a rush, trembling and fragile. Michael, I was looking through the old photo albums. Why aren't I in them? Why are I missing from so many pictures? He looked up from his tablet, a mild expression on his face that quickly shifted to feigned confusion. Photo albums? Which ones? Section, the ones in the attic. The blue one, the leather one, there are hardly any pictures of me, and the ones that are there, some of them are cropped. My voice cracked on the last word. He sighed, a weary, put upon sound that immediately put me on the defensive. Oh, Clara, don't be dramatic. They're just old photos. Maybe I wasn't a great photographer. Maybe you were always behind the camera? Section. Not always, I insisted, my voice growing stronger despite the tremor. I was there. I lived those moments. I was at that picnic. I was there on Christmas morning. I planned those parties. I was part of this family. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Of course you were. Nobody's saying you weren't. But to go through old albums and count photos, that seems a little obsessive, don't you think? Obsessive? My heart hammered against my ribs. He was turning it back on me, making my pain, my very valid concern, into a character flaw. It's not about counting photos. It's about feeling like I've been erased, like my presence didn't matter enough to even be recorded. Section. That's ridiculous, he said, his voice losing its mildness, a hard edge creeping in. You're here now, aren't you? Stop dwelling on the past. They're just pictures. Section. They're not just pictures, Michael. They're memories. They're proof that I was there, that I was part of this life. And you took me out. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. He bristled. I did not take you out. Don't accuse me of something like that. Maybe you just don't photograph well. Maybe you were always busy with something else. Honestly, Clara, I don't have time for this. I've had a long day. He dismissed me, just like that. He invalidated my feelings, denied his actions, and shut down the conversation. He made me feel small, paranoid, and completely alone. The man I had shared my life with for 2 decades couldn't even offer me the basic dignity of acknowledging my hurt, let alone admitting what he had done. The days that followed were a blur of silent agony. I couldn't shake the feeling of being a ghost in my own home. Every room felt haunted by my unseen efforts, my unacknowledged presence. I looked at my children, the teenagers they were now, and wondered if they even remembered my presence in those early years the way I did. Had Michael's narrative, the one where he was the primary parent, the provider, the visible force, already taken hold in their minds? I started to question everything. Was I crazy? Was I overreacting? Were they just photos? The gaslighting was insidious, burrowing into my sense of self-worth. I pulled back, becoming quieter, more withdrawn. My friends noticed. My sister called, concerned. Para Clara, you sound different. Are you okay? Section. I don't know, Sarah, I admitted, the words barely a whisper. I feel like I'm disappearing. I cautiously explained what had happened with the photos, the confrontation with Michael, his reaction. Sarah listened patiently, her silence on the other end of the line, a comforting presence. Oh, Clara, she said softly when I finished. That's awful. It's not just photos, is it? It's everything. It's him trying to erase your value. Her words were a lifeline. They validated my experience, pulled me back from the brink of believing I was just being dramatic or obsessive. It wasn't just me. This was real. This was deliberate. This was a form of control, a way of diminishing me. Sarah urged me to talk to someone professional, and after days of hesitation, I made an appointment with a therapist. Sitting in her calm, neutral office, the story poured out of me, not just the photos, but the years of subtle dismissals, the unacknowledged labor, the feeling of being a supporting character in my own life story. The therapist, Dr. Ramirez, listened with an empathetic nod. She didn't offer quick fixes or platitudes. She helped me connect the dots, to see the pattern of behavior that had been eroding my sense of self for years. She introduced me to concepts like emotional labor, narcissistic traits in relationships. Though she never explicitly labeled Michael, the descriptions resonated deeply, and the insidious nature of gaslighting. Section. He is attempting to control the narrative, Dr. Ramirez explained gently. By removing you from the visual history, he is trying to diminish your role, perhaps even rewrite the past in his own mind and for others. It's a form of power and control. Understanding this shifted something within me. It wasn't about me being inadequate or paranoid. It was about him needing to feel dominant, to minimize my importance to inflate his own. It was a reflection of his insecurity, not my worthlessness. The realization was painful, but also clarifying. I saw my years of people-pleasing, of prioritizing his needs and the family's needs above my own, not as acts of selfless love, but as a slow chipping away at my soul. I had allowed myself to be erased because I thought that was what a good wife did. She faded into the background, supporting her husband, keeping the home running smoothly, without demanding recognition or even visibility. The path forward was blurry, but I knew one thing. I couldn't continue this way. I couldn't live as a ghost in my own life, waiting for someone else to acknowledge my existence. I had to acknowledge it myself. I had to reclaim my narrative. I had to build my own legacy. Section Dr. Ramirez helped me understand that reclaiming my legacy wasn't about proving Michael wrong or forcing him to put me back in the photo albums. It was about solidifying my own truth, for myself and potentially for my children, in a way that was independent of his control or approval. So, I started small. I began digging. I went through old boxes that I had packed away years ago. Things that were mine. My own photo albums from before I met Michael. Journals I had kept in my 20s. Old school reports and college transcripts. Certificates from courses I had taken. Files from the part-time work I had done when the kids were younger. Work that had contributed financially even if it wasn't a grand career. Letters from friends and family who had seen me, who had appreciated me. It was like assembling a forgotten puzzle. Piece by piece, my life, began to emerge, vibrant and real, separate from the life I had shared with Michael. There were photos of me laughing with friends, traveling before marriage, achieving things, looking confident and happy. There were journal entries detailing my dreams, my fears, my growth. There were letters filled with warmth and genuine connection. I found photos I had taken over the years, photos Michael had never bothered with, or perhaps had overlooked when he was curating his own version of history. Photos of me with the kids, silly selfies we'd taken, moments of quiet connection he hadn't captured or hadn't wanted to. It wasn't just documentation of my physical presence. It was documentation of my spirit, my efforts, my contributions that went beyond the domestic. I remembered fundraising I'd done for the kids' school, volunteer work at the local library, the complex logistics I'd managed coordinating family visits and holidays, the emotional support I'd provided not just to my immediate family, but to extended relatives Michael barely spoke to. I started a new album, one that was solely mine. I filled it with these rediscovered photos, these pieces of my life. I wrote captions detailing the moments, the feelings, my perspective. This wasn't just a collection of pictures, it was a declaration. A declaration that I existed, that I mattered, that my life had substance and value, regardless of whether someone else chose to see it. I also decided to compile a more tangible record of my contributions. This felt almost absurd, like building a resume for a job I'd already done for free for 20 years. But it was necessary. I gathered old bank statements showing the money I'd managed, sometimes earned. I compiled lists of major household projects I'd overseen, repairs I'd coordinated, financial decisions I'd researched and executed. I listed the endless tasks of childcare, meal planning, cleaning, emotional regulation, and logistical management that had been the invisible infrastructure of our family life. I even included emails and texts showing the support I'd given Michael during stressful periods in his career. It was a quiet, damning testament to the labor he had erased. As I worked on this, a new kind of strength began to fill me. It wasn't the strength of defiance or anger, but the quiet power of truth. My truth. The more I documented my life, the more real it felt, the more solid my sense of self became. I wasn't just rebuilding my history, I was rebuilding me. I continued therapy. Dr. Ramirez helped me articulate boundaries I needed to set, not just with Michael, but with anyone who had contributed to my feeling of invisibility. She helped me understand that saying no, prioritizing my own needs, and demanding respect were not selfish acts, but necessary steps towards self-preservation and authenticity. The confrontation about the photos had changed the dynamic between Michael and me irrevocably. There was a coldness, a distance. He continued to act as if I had been unreasonable, but I no longer folded. I had found my voice, however shaky it sometimes felt. The opportunity to present my legacy arrived unexpectedly. It was my daughter Emily's 18th birthday party. Michael had planned a large gathering, inviting friends and family. It was meant to be a celebration of Emily entering adulthood, but I knew, implicitly, that it would also be another opportunity for Michael to showcase his version of the family, the one where he was the central figure. I debated whether to go. The thought of facing him, facing the people who might have unknowingly bought into his narrative, filled me with anxiety. But then I looked at my new album, the one filled with my memories, my truth, and I knew I had to go. Not for him, not for them, but for me. And for Emily and Mark, who deserve to know the full story of their family, not just the edited version. I arrived at the party not with a gift, but with my album and a box containing some of the documents I had compiled. I felt a strange sense of calm mixed with nervous anticipation. Michael greeted guests, playing the role of the genial host. He introduced people, telling anecdotes about the kids, subtly highlighting his own role in their lives. I mingled, making small talk, but my purpose was clear. As people began to gather for cake, Michael tapped a glass for attention. Section. All right, everyone. Thank you all for coming to celebrate Emily's 18th. It's hard to believe she's all grown up. I remember when he launched into an anecdote about Emily as a child, one that focused heavily on his own involvement. When he finished, there was applause. He smiled, clearly pleased. And then, I stepped forward. Section. If I could just add something, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. All eyes turned to me. Michael looked surprised, then annoyed. Section, Clara? He prompted, clearly wanting me to be brief and not disrupt his moment. Section, Emily, I began, addressing my daughter directly, ignoring Michael. Turning 18 is a huge milestone. It's about stepping into your own story. And as you do that, it's important to know where you come from, the full picture. I held up the album I had made. I was looking through some old photos recently, and I realized that not all of our family's memories were completely represented. So, I put together a collection of my own. I walked over to a table and placed the album and the box down. I opened the album to a page filled with photos of me with the kids when they were small, photos that weren't in Michael's albums. These are moments Michael might not have captured, or maybe he wasn't there for, like this one. I pointed. The time Emily insisted on wearing her rain boots to the beach. I spent an hour convincing her sand wouldn't get in them, and we both ended up laughing. I flipped to another page, or this one, Mark's first school play. I stayed up all night sewing his costume, and I was sitting right there in the front row beaming. I continued, showing photos, telling stories that centered my experience, my presence, my emotional investment in their lives. The room was quiet. Michael's smile had vanished. He looked furious, but he couldn't interrupt without making a scene. I didn't just show photos. I opened the box. And this? I said, pulling out a binder, is a record of some of the things I did behind the scenes. The endless hours coordinating schedules, managing the household finances, taking care of illnesses, supporting Michael through his career changes, volunteering at school, building relationships with extended family. The things that aren't always visible, but were essential to making our life work. I looked at Emily, then at Mark, who had approached the table, curiosity on his face. This is all part of your legacy, too. I told them. The unseen work, the quiet dedication, the foundation that was built with love and effort, even when it wasn't always seen or appreciated. Then, I looked directly at Michael, my voice clear and steady. No one gets to erase your past. No one gets to diminish your contributions. Your story belongs to you. It wasn't a shouting match. It wasn't a dramatic scene from a movie. It was quiet, factual, and utterly devastating in its truth. I wasn't asking for permission to exist. I was declaring my existence. I wasn't begging to be put back in his photos. I was showing them my photos, my record, my legacy. The aftermath was exactly what I expected. Michael pulled me aside later, his face red with anger. What the hell was that, Clara? You deliberately tried to humiliate me. Section. No, Michael, I said calmly. I presented the truth you tried to bury by erasing me from our family history. Section. It was unnecessary, bringing all that up, showing those things. Section. It was necessary for me, I interrupted. And it was necessary for our children to know the full story, not just the one you want to tell, where my role is minimal or invisible. Section. You've always been so dramatic, he scoffed, resorting to his usual tactic. Section. And you've always been an expert at making my contributions disappear. I countered, no longer flinching at his words. I'm done being erased, Michael. I'm done living in your edited version of reality. That night was the turning point. The lines were drawn, the truth was out. There was no going back to the quiet, complicit invisibility I had endured. The weeks that followed were difficult. There were tense conversations, more accusations from Michael, attempts to manipulate and guilt-trip me, but something fundamental had shifted within me. I had shown up for myself, I had spoken my truth, and that act of self-validation was more powerful than years of seeking his approval. The children were confused, caught in the middle. Emily, perhaps because she was older, seemed to grasp the weight of what I had done. She looked at the album I'd made with a thoughtful expression. Mark was quieter, but I saw him looking at the documents, the lists I'd compiled, perhaps beginning to understand the invisible workload his mother had carried. The family, friends, and relatives who had been at the party were divided. Some avoided me, uncomfortable with the disruption I had caused. Others reached out privately, offering support, acknowledging that they had always seen my efforts, even if Michael hadn't. My sister, Sarah, was a constant source of strength. The decision to separate felt inevitable. I couldn't stay in a marriage where my partner had actively tried to erase me and then gaslit me when I discovered it. It wasn't just about the photos, it was about the fundamental lack of respect, the entitlement, the deliberate undermining of my worth. Fleeing wasn't easy. It meant dismantling the life we had built, navigating the complexities of divorce, and facing the unknown. There was grief, not just for the marriage, but for the future I had envisioned, the family unit I had so desperately tried to hold together. But there was also an incredible sense of liberation. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt fully present in my own life. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was real, solid, and undeniably here. I found a small apartment, a space that was entirely mine. I decorated it simply, filling it with things that brought me joy, not things chosen to fit someone else's idea of a perfect home. I displayed my photos, the ones I had taken, the ones my friends had taken, the ones from my album that chronicled my life. I focused on rebuilding. I reconnected with old passions I had set aside. I pursued interests Michael had subtly discouraged or dismissed as unimportant. I built a new community, forged new friendships with people who saw me, heard me, and valued my presence. My relationship with my children changed. With the truth out in the open, the dynamics shifted. Michael continued to try and present his version of reality, but my act of defiance, my presentation of my own legacy, had planted a seed of doubt. They began to see the contrast between his narrative and the tangible evidence of my life, my work, my unwavering presence in their upbringing. They started to come to me with questions, seeking my perspective, seeing me not just as Mom, the background figure, but as Clara, a person with her own history, her own struggles, her own triumphs. The binder of compiled contributions felt less like an indictment over time and more like a record of survival, a reminder of how much I had given, how much I had built, often with little or no support. It was proof of my strength, my resilience, my capacity. I learned to set boundaries, not just with Michael, but with everyone. I learned to say no without guilt. I learned to prioritize my own well-being, my own needs, my own happiness. I learned that my worth wasn't conditional on being useful or agreeable or invisible. My worth was inherent. Looking back now, I see the woman I was, kind, capable, but desperately afraid of rocking the boat, of not being loved, of being alone. She buried her own identity under layers of expectation and self-neglect. She allowed herself to be erased, little by little, because she didn't know how to demand to be seen. And I see the woman I am now, still kind, still capable, but also strong, clear, and unapologetically herself. The scar of the betrayal is still there, a faint ache that reminds me of where I came from, but it's no longer an open wound. It's a reminder of the battle I fought and won, the battle for my own existence, my own story, my own legacy. The photo albums in Michael's house might still be missing my image, his curated history might still tell a distorted story. But it doesn't matter anymore, because I have my albums, I have my record, I have my truth, and that is the most powerful legacy of all. It's a legacy not written in fading ink or cropped photographs, but etched into my soul, clear and indelible. I showed up with my own legacy, and it was brighter and stronger than anything they could ever erase. And that, my friends, is how I went from being the woman who was erased from her family photos to the woman who finally chose to be seen, fully and completely, on her own terms. It wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, and heartbreaking. There were moments I wanted to give up, to just retreat and disappear completely. But the thought of letting someone else dictate my worth, someone else rewrite my history, became more terrifying than the pain of fighting for myself. It took hitting rock bottom, staring at those blank spaces in the photo albums, to realize just how much of myself I had already lost. It was a wake-up call, a harsh, cold dose of reality that forced me to confront the dynamic I had been living in for years. I had been so focused on being the supportive wife, the good mother, the one who kept the peace, that I had forgotten to be Clara. Rebuilding my sense of self wasn't a linear process. There were days filled with doubt, moments where the old voice in my head, the one that told me I was being selfish, dramatic, ungrateful, would creep back in. But I had tools now. I had my therapist, my sister, my own tangible proof of my life. I would look at my album, read my journal entries, remind myself of the strength it took to do all the things I had done while feeling invisible. I learned that my worth wasn't tied to external validation, particularly not from someone who benefited from minimizing me. It was an internal knowing, a quiet confidence that grew stronger every time I honored my own feelings, set a boundary, or pursued something that was meaningful to me. The children's understanding evolved over time. Teenagers are naturally self-absorbed, and initially, the disruption to their family life was the primary focus. But as they matured, as they witnessed my transformation, my newfound independence and clarity, they began to see the situation through a different lens. Emily, especially, would sometimes sit with me, flipping through my album, asking questions about the stories behind the pictures. She saw the vibrant, resilient woman who was her mother, a woman separate from the role she played in Michael's narrative. Park, quieter than Emily, expressed his understanding in different ways. He started asking for my advice on things he previously would have gone to Michael for. He witnessed the stability and peace I had created in my own life, a stark contrast to the tension that still sometimes surrounded his interactions with his father. There were still interactions with Michael, necessary ones regarding the children and finances. These interactions were usually brief, businesslike, and carefully navigated. He never apologized for the photos, never acknowledged the pain he caused, but I didn't need him to anymore. His lack of accountability was no longer a reflection of my worth, but a reflection of his character. My life now is simpler in some ways, more complex in others. I navigate challenges alone, but I do it with a sense of agency I never had before. The unseen labor is still there, the managing of my own household, the planning of my own future, but now it's my labor for my benefit, and I see it, I value it, and I acknowledge it every single day. I've reconnected with friends who had drifted away, people who remembered the Clara before the marriage, before the slow fade into invisibility. Their laughter, their perspectives, their genuine care were like sunlight after a long, dark winter. I even took up painting again, something I had loved in college but had stopped because it wasn't practical and took up too much space and time and space that were always needed for the family. For Michael's Pursuits. Now, I have a corner in my apartment filled with canvases and paints, a space that is unapologetically mine, dedicated to my own creative expression. Each stroke of the brush feels like reclaiming a piece of my soul. This journey taught me that our stories are not static. They are living, breathing things that we have the power to shape, even when others try to manipulate them. My legacy isn't just in the photos I saved or the documents I compiled, it's in the woman I became through the process of fighting for my own truth. Section. It's the quiet confidence in my voice, the way I stand a little taller, the peace that has settled in my heart. It's knowing that even when someone tries to erase you, your existence is undeniable. Your contributions matter. Your story is valid. And the most important person to believe that is yourself. So, for anyone watching who feels unseen, who feels like their efforts are invisible, who suspects someone is trying to diminish their light, start collecting your own evidence. Document your life, your contributions, your truth. Create your own album, write your own story. Because no one else can do it for you, and no one else has the right to tell you that you don't belong in the picture. You are the picture. You are the story. You are the legacy. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. It's been a long time coming. If this resonated with you, if you faced anything similar, please give this video a like. It helps more than you know. And if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult times, navigating toxic relationships, and rebuilding your life, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss my next video. Section. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt erased? How did you find your way back to yourself? Sharing our experiences helps us all feel a little less alone. Remember, your story is powerful, your presence is valuable. Don't let anyone ever tell you differently. You are worthy of being seen, heard, and celebrated. Till next time, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.